Hello folks, welcome back to Reaper Minis TV. Before we get to reviews for this episode, we do need to take care of our contest from last time around. And this was where one of our subscribers was going to get one each of the figures you see here. They're going to get unpainted, still in blister versions of each one of these four figures. And unfortunately, our first winner that we drew did not get a hold of me by the 15th. In fact, they didn't get a hold of me at all. So we have drawn a second subscriber to win these figures. And our new winner is the First Warlock. So the First Warlock, you have until the 1st of August to get a hold of me, and I'll mail these out to you. You need to send me an email to reapertv@tx.rr.com. That's reapertv@tx.rr.com, and I'll get these right out to you. Okay, so now we're going to get to reviews for this episode, and we're going to start off with a figure that's about to come out, and it's somewhat unique for a Reaper miniature. In the past, Reaper has done a couple of resin pieces, but they're more like display pieces or things like that. To my knowledge, this is the first gaming figure that they've done in resin, or at least in partial resin. This is Borog, I think I'm pronouncing that right, Blackrime, and he's an Isingstead Jarl, so he's a frost giant. And if you're not playing an Isingstead army in Warlord, obviously you could use it as a frost giant in any kind of fantasy game. But what makes him unique in terms of Reaper miniatures is the bulk of the miniature is resin, and then there are 3 parts that are metal. And we'll go ahead and get the blister open so we can see all the pieces. And, well, whoops, I will try to use the X-Acto knife like an adult here and get the pieces out without damaging it or myself. And you can see the main body, most of the figure is the resin piece there, and you've got a couple other metal pieces. You've got a 40mm square plastic base, and here's everything sort of laid out. Base like you'd expect. And then we have a sword, we have the head, and we have part of a necklace. Now, I'll get you some close-up shots of all the pieces in a second, but here's the body. If this was in metal, it would just be massively heavy, and you can see it's rather large compared to the size of my hand. So it's a very, well, hefty in terms of being a large piece. It's not hefty in weight. It weighs next to nothing because it's resin. Still has excellent detail. Nothing wrong with it at all. Now here's the head, and again you'll see a close-up of that in a second. The sword. And then here we're going to have the necklace piece that goes under his chin. Now here's a close-up of the 3 metal pieces. There's the hand and sword, and the sword is the same as the other ice giant spears. It's in that jagged, whether it's rock or stone or ice, whatever. It just looks pretty cool. The head, you can see he's yelling something, and then the little necklace piece. Now here's the close-up detail of the body itself. Here's the front of it. You can see lots of good detail on the model. And I'll give you a size comparison compared to some other Reaper figures in just a second, so you can see how large it actually is. So good muscle definition, good little bits of detail all over the model. Here's the backside, and it's mostly just his cape. Little bits of flesh and some details of his armor there, but mostly his cape on the backside. And then here's a comparison shot. There's the female fire giant on the far left and our frost giant Jarl. And then we've got a Pathfinder figure and a warlord dwarf. So you can see he is very large, and even compared to the female fire giant, he's kind of stooped over a little bit. So if he was standing straight up, he would be even larger. And you can see his arms are quite thick. And it really is a massive model. It's definitely comparable to the fairly recently released Fire Giant and Fire Giant King that were all metal. So it's as big as those are, but the bulk of it is resin, so it's 2 things. It's significantly lighter and significantly cheaper in cost if you were to compare it to the Fire Giant King. If this was done just all in Reaper's regular white metal, it would probably be a $50 figure. If it was done on the P65 line, it would probably be around $35, $36. But here, with the bulk of it being resin, it's about 26 bucks, which is very reasonable for a figure this size. And I hope this is the beginning of some more large-scale figures from Reaper that are done mostly in resin, just because it's going to keep the cost cheaper than all metal, and it's going to be just a little lighter on the tabletop. It'll be a little easier to move around. You're not going to drop it and crush something else underneath it. So awesome model, good uses outside of Warlord for D&D, Pathfinder, things like that. You could even drop it into Warriors of Chaos army as a Chaos Giant if you wanted to. So all around, excellent model, no complaints from me. Now when you're prepping the model to prime it, you do need to take an extra step and wash off in soapy water the resin, the body of the model, just to make sure that all the release agent and anything that went into the casting process of the resin piece is cleaned up before you try to prime it. So just wash it off and you should be good. And here are some still pics of a painted version of it. Okay, and we'll get into a couple other figures for this episode. This is the Well of Chaos. It's a two-piece miniature, and you can see there's the well itself and then a large decorative, almost back piece that fits on top of it. The back piece fits easily into place, no problems with assembly or anything like that. It is broken a little bit, and that's part of the figure itself. It's not a miscast or anything. And the front of it, it has a sort of Cthulhu-ish or H.R. Giger-esque face that's sculpted onto the front of it. I've been thinking a little bit about using this for part of a Cauldron of Blood diorama for my Dark Elves for Warhammer Fantasy. I'm not 100% sure if it's going to work for that yet, but that's what I'm thinking of using it for. Lots of good detail all over the figure itself. Doesn't look like it's going to be hard to paint at all. I think it would make a good piece of dungeon scenery if you have a dungeon room where you have a mysterious well or something that the party encounters. I think it'd be good for that, or if you have some other specific use for it, like I'm sort of thinking of that Cauldron of Blood idea, or maybe something else you might have in mind. These next two figures are from the Pathfinder line. First one is a Serpent Folk Warrior, and this immediately caught my eye because I'm sort of slowly building up a Lizardman army for Warhammer Fantasy. Yes, I know, yet another Warhammer Fantasy army, but I am using a lot of Reaper Reptus figures in it, and I think this guy would do really well in that army also. It's a single-piece miniature where he's carrying a sword in his right hand, and he's got a couple of skulls as trophies that he's holding up in his left hand. He's not as bulky as some other Lizardmen models, a little more slender, but very good detail on the scales, the head. I really have no complaints about the sculpt itself. A little bit strange that he's wearing boots, but a little bit of a unique feature there. In the long term, I'd really like to see a couple other variants of a Serpent Folk Warrior, and that's sort of a selfish request for me, just because I'd like to fill out a unit with some different looking models. But I might be able to use him as a champion leader of a unit for a Lizardman army, and in D&D, Pathfinder, whatever fantasy game you're playing, you could use him in the same way as a Lizardman, Serpent Folk, whatever. This figure is Nyrissa, a Dryad Queen, and the first thing that came to mind for her is using her as a spellcaster in either a Warlord Wood Elf army or a Warhammer Wood Elf army. I think it would make an outstanding, unique figure in either one of those games where you'd have a spellcaster that really stands out as a really special figure in the army, just something that people haven't seen before. It's a two-piece figure, and her long cloak looks like it's made up of giant leaves, and you're going to glue this down to the base and glue her onto the cape. What I would suggest is priming each figure or each piece of the figure individually, painting each one individually, and then when you're done, gluing her onto the cape. That way you're going to be able to get to the back side of her and the front side of the cape without really having too much of an issue on overpainting and having to fix things. So like I said, I think it would do very well in a Wood Elf army. You could also use it as an Elven Druid or similar kind of figure in a role-playing game. But for me, Wood Elf army, Spellcaster, that's the way to go with this figure. Okay everybody, thanks for watching this episode of Reaper Minis TV. We'll see you next time.